Let's talk the top 5 wide receivers of the 2026 NFL Draft, along with a dark horse candidate with our mock draft expert, Ryan McCrystal. Welcome into another episode of Sharp Football Analysis. I'm Warren Sharp, joined by our NFL mock draft expert, Ryan McCrystal. And Ryan McCrystal is known for his accuracy in being able to predict what the NFL teams are going to value the most and what they're going to do in the NFL draft. He's outstanding in his accuracy with his mock draft, whether it's the first round or his big board, where he has the highest big board score in history, according to the Huddle Report, and ranks as the 7th most accurate big board in the last 5 years combined. So really fortunate to be joined by Ryan McCrystal to break down the NFL wide receivers. Make sure that you guys are subscribed at all your favorite platforms to get more analysis just like this. And let's dive right into it, Ryan. The number 1 wide receiver of the 2026 draft class, according to you, is Carnell Tate out of Ohio State. Talk to us about what makes him so special.
Yeah, this is an easy choice for me with Carnell Tate, and it's for a lot of the same reasons that we've seen so many Ohio State receivers excel in the NFL in recent years. You know, you may have seen Carnell Tate at the combine and sort of generate some negative headlines by not having a great 40 time. I think it was 4.5 something that he put up on the board, which isn't great. Obviously, you'd rather have a receiver who can run 4.3 or 4.4. But the reason all of these Ohio State receivers have been successful in recent years, despite playing very different roles in the offense, we've seen all of them be able to transition to the NFL and continue to play at a high level because they are such good route runners. They've developed these receivers to just perfect routes and run at an NFL veteran level while they're still in college. That's why they're so dominant in college and why the transition to the NFL for each of them has been relatively smooth, because if you can run routes at a really high level, you can play against anybody. And if you're like Carnell Tate and you don't have that blazing speed, it's okay, because you can set up defensive backs and create separation within your routes. Now, because he doesn't have blazing speed, he might run into certain matchups where he's not as dominant. He's an outside wide receiver. He's got height. He can compete for jump balls down the field. He does tend to win by stretching the field. And obviously that doesn't pair well with not having elite speed. So there's going to be certain cornerbacks, the best of the best in the NFL, that are probably able to limit him. But because he is such a great route runner, they're going to be able to move him around and find the right matchup. And when he does line up in a matchup against an inexperienced defensive back or someone that can't match his size, he's going to get open almost every time because he's just that good of a route runner. It's very similar to Chris Olave. He kind of Olave did run very fast at the combine. That's why he's been, so dominant when he's been healthy in the NFL. But he played the same role in the Ohio State offense, and it's the routes that made each of them so successful. They know how to set up defensive backs and just get behind them. And once he creates that one step of separation, that's all he needs, because he's going to finish the job. With being so tall, it just allows him to go over the top of most defensive backs once he gets that one step. So he doesn't need to create 5 yards of separation. He just gets that one step and then his height takes over. So I think he's the safest bet to be a reliable starter in the NFL.
The exact opposite of that, I think, is your number 2 receiver, who is a little bit undersized and hasn't really done himself very many favors in the pre-draft session here. But when you put on the tape last year, he was just making plays and contributing to wins. And I'm speaking of Makai Lemon out of USC. Talk to us about some of his positives and negatives entering the 2026 draft and why you have him as the number 2 receiver in this class.
Yeah, very different receiver than Carnell Tate. And really the top 4 guys that we're going to talk about all could play very different roles in an offense. And so I think it's going to be, even though I think Carnell Tate is number 1, I won't be surprised to hear a different receiver come off the board number 1, because it's really just going to come down to what your preference is and what you need for your offense. Because someone like Makai Lemon, he has some versatility as far as playing inside or outside, but I think he's best in the slot. I think he can be a really high volume slot receiver who does most of his damage on underneath routes and producing after the catch. He's really quick. He can create separation in short space, and that's what you want from that type of slot receiver. And that's why he could be, really a high volume slot receiver, because you can kind of trust him to almost always get open unless he's attracting extra attention, because he's so quick. He can create separation right off the snap. And so it's easy to get the ball to him on those quick development plays that you want to run for those types of slot receivers. I think he's also a very safe bet to succeed in the NFL because of those traits for very different reasons than Carnell Tate. There's such different receivers. It's kind of fun to have those two guys at the top of the draft because you can see them winning in such different ways. But they're also so safe because those two types of traits, the ability to create separation with your routes on the outside for Carnell Tate, on the inside for Lemon. If you create separation with your routes, that's just a really high floor for those types of players. So I'm excited about seeing where Lemon goes because I think he could be an immediate producer in the NFL.
Your third best receiver in this draft class is Denzel Boston out of Washington. Talk to us a little bit about what he brings to the table here.
Yeah, Boston's another outside receiver. He wins a little bit different than Tate. He's not quite as refined in his route running, but he's got the size and strength to just sort of body you and be a rebounder who just gets open and wins those contested catches. One of the reasons why I have him up pretty high, higher than most people might, is because I also think he's really good after the catch. It's kind of an underrated aspect of his game because you see him and you see the way that he's using the offense. You wouldn't necessarily expect it because it's not the number one reason why you're going to draft Denzel Boston. You're going to draft him to be able to get open down the field, compete for those jump balls, be a weapon in the red zone. But when you can also add to that a guy who can catch a slant and make a defensive back miss and produce after the catch more than most people expect, it just adds another dangerous element to his game, and it opens up the different ways that you can use him, and it changes how the defense is approaching him. If you can occasionally work him in those underneath routes, it's going to change the way defensive backs line up and how they're anticipating the routes that he's going to run. It reminds me a little bit of Tet McMillan, who was drafted high last year in terms of that. Like, he's not quite as big as McMillan, but he is sort of filling that same role. And yet he's deceptively good after the catch. And I don't think it's a coincidence because they both played for the same wide receiver coach, the guy that McMillan played with at Arizona, then went up with Jedd Fisch to Washington and coached Denzel Boston for 2 years. And there's a lot of similarities in their game. And so I think he's going to be able to produce in that same way as a downfield weapon, but he's got just enough of succeeding at the other things that I think he's a really well-rounded target and could be a number one weapon in the NFL.
Your fourth best wide receiver in this class simply could not stay healthy, but definitely has some elite traits. Jordyn Tyson out of Arizona State is a guy that you have ranked fourth best of this class. Talk to us about what he brings to the table and what he could do in the NFL, presuming he is able to stay healthy.
Yeah, we've got yet another prototype here in Jordyn Tyson. He's going to be the big slot guy. Now, he can play on the outside as well. He's stretched the field at Arizona State at times when he was their number one weapon, especially 2 years ago when they went on that playoff run. But I like him best in that big slot role, the possession receiver in the slot. The question I have with him is the consistency. He had too many drops. He's a little bit awkward when he's going up for the ball, trying to adjust to the poorly placed ball. That's the reason I don't have him higher, even though some people think that, maybe he could go even as high as in the top 12 to 15 picks. I like him a lot. He's still a first rounder for me. I'd have no problem with the team drafting him on day one, but that inconsistency does raise some question marks for me. The thing that teams are going to like about him, though, is his physicality. And that's why I really like him in the slot, is because you're going to be able to create some mismatches. A receiver who has his size and also plays physical, seeks out that physical play, it's going to create a lot of mismatches because there's going to be times when he's matched up with somebody in the slot who wants no part of his physical play, and you're going to want to feed him the ball in those situations. So even if he does continue to struggle with drops a little bit in the NFL, I think there's still going to be a productive role for him just because he's going to be a guy that you can create mismatches for.
All right, rounding out the top 5 best wide receivers in the 2026 draft class, you've got Chris Brazzell out of Tennessee. Talk to us about what Brazzell might bring to an NFL team who drafts him this upcoming draft.
Yeah, Brazzell's a little bit closer to the Carnell Tate mold of a guy who's going to play on the outside and stretch the field. He's a long strider who wins with speed, probably faster than Tate, so he can just kind of run past guys at times. He's still developing, and it didn't quite all click for him. Tennessee's an offense where they really like to throw downfield, so it's a place. When he transferred to Tennessee, I thought it was a place where he was going to thrive immediately, and it sort of took him a while to get in the swing of things until he finally had a breakout year this past season. So the fact that he's been slow to develop kind of raises a little bit of a red flag. You'd like to see him have been, had a more productive career. But there's only so many players at his size that can run downfield the way that he can. And so I think his ceiling is to be a George Pickens type, a guy who can really, win with both size and speed on the outside. He's not close to what Pickens is at this point in his career. So there's definitely more development that's needed. But on day two, if a team wants to take a swing at a guy who has a high ceiling and you're hopeful that you can develop him over the next couple of years, I think Brazzell's the perfect guy to try to plug in and develop. Don't draft him if you need immediate number one receiver production from him. But if you could sort of work him into the offense over the next year or two and hope that he turns into another George Pickens, I think that could be really attractive to some teams on day two.
Speaking of a player that might have the ability to turn into something, let's talk about a dark horse candidate. You've given us your top 5 best wide receivers of this class. Give us another name of a player that could end up developing into something more than what people currently are viewing him as.
Yeah, I'll go with Skyler Bell from UConn. Started his career at Wisconsin, ended up at UConn, and had a just incredible year this past season. Put up huge numbers in the UConn offense. They had a really surprisingly strong year for that football program that often struggles, and Bell was a huge part of it. I see him as a guy that you would want to target if you were hoping for Makai Lemon in the first round and missed on him. I would want to get Skyler Bell on day two. Probably slides to the late second, definitely off the board in the third round. I think he's a inside-outside versatility, but I like him best as a quick slot receiver who can produce after the catch. Now, the reason why, even after that dominant season that he had at UConn this past year, that we're not talking about him in the same group as those top 5 receivers, and why I think there is a good gap between him and Lemon, at least in terms of how much I trust them coming into the league, is that Bell really struggled catching the ball early in his career. It's why he didn't work out at Wisconsin, why he didn't even, immediately produce after transferring to UConn and playing against lesser competition. Based on route adjusted data in 2024, when he was playing full time at UConn, his catch rate was 13% below expected. That's horrendous. That's among the worst in all of college football. But last year, it jumped up to 3% above expected. So he wasn't dominant in that area, but he jumped up to an above expected rate, made a huge improvement. And if he can just stay in that range where he's not dropping having multiple drops per game, and just stay in that range where he's just an average catcher, catches the balls that he's supposed to, maybe makes an occasional mistake, you can live with that because he can be so dangerous after the catch. So if he proves that that was not an aberration, that he really did make the necessary adjustments to improve that part of his game, I think he'd be a day two steal and be a high volume slot receiver for someone in the NFL.
All right, there you have it. If you want more draft analysis from Ryan and the rest of the Sharp Football team, go to sharp.football and join our free mailing list today, and we'll see you on the next one.